Election, uh, there was people arguing or whatever, and I wound up getting involved in it. And I was talking about the statistics about, who the net taxpayers are, who is receiving the money from the government and everything. And, the government pretty much transfers wealth from the young to the old, from men to women, and from whites to minorities. That's the truth of it. And all the data and all the facts are there to back up that what I'm saying is true. And I was accused of spreading hatred. He says I'm spreading hatred, and that I'm disguising racism as math. Hello, Raven Hart. But it's not spreading hatred, it's the truth. And now some people may decide to hate based on that. I don't. But sometimes anger is justified. Sometimes anger is justified. Me being upset about people not pulling their weight is justified. Let's say that you're at school and you get a group project. And in this group project, you got like 5 people assigned to the group. And you have to write a report on, I don't know, the history of the Coca-Cola company, right? And let's say in that group, you have one person doing all the work, and all the other people decide they're not going to do anything. They're just going to, because you all share a grade, you get graded as a group, and they're just going to sit back and let you do all the work. And then you get mad. You're like, this isn't fair. Y'all need to help do something. And then the people that are not doing anything, they say, oh, you say I'm not doing anything? That's spreading hate. You're mad at me? Okay, you're a hater. And this is just absolute nonsense. And it's not everyone. I'm not saying everyone. People are not a monolith. Like, every black person is not the same. Every white person's not the same. Every woman's not the same. Every man's not the same. But there are things that are generally true about different populations, different demographics, different groups. And it is, it's anyone who's went to school and been assigned a group project has experienced this. It's happened all over the world. It doesn't matter what country you're in. It doesn't matter what part of the United States you're in. Everyone experiences this. That when you're put on a school group project and the whole group shares a grade, the people in the group do not do equal work. There's always some people who sort of hang back and let a few of the people in the group do the majority of the work. And if the people not doing the work get mad at the people that are doing the work for calling them out, I mean, that's basically what's happening. Hello, Mr. Bean Jr. When I was a kid, I used to watch Mr. Bean. Mama got some of those, rented some of those movies. Hi, bro. So, yeah, the facts are not hateful, Now, some people may hate and some people may be angry about it, but it's justified. It's justified for people to get angry when they're having to do all the work and the other people aren't doing the work. It's not fair. People have a right to that anger. And so when I'm angry about it and they're saying, oh, you're full of hate, I'm not full of hate. I don't have hatred, but I am angry about it. And it makes it even worse. It would be one thing if you were expected to do all the work and they hung back and didn't do the work and you shared the grade. You would already be angry about that. But it would be even more upsetting if the people who didn't do any of the work called you an oppressor for it. They got you to do all the work. They hung back. They got you to be the net taxpayer. They just held back, didn't work, leached welfare, made you do all the work, and then call you the oppressor while they're basically using the government to enslave you and live off your labor, and then they call you the oppressor. Do you see how somebody could get mad about that? But there's these tactics people use to avoid accountability. You try to hold a woman accountable. What's she going to do? She's going to call you a misogynist. You try to hold a Jew accountable. They're going to call you anti-Semitic. You try to hold a black person accountable, now you're racist. Now, some people are racist. Some people are misogynistic. Some people are anti-Semitic. And but it's not always the case. Most of the time, people are being labeled those things unfairly. And then there's another question to ask, regardless if the person has hatred in their heart or prejudice or bias, are they lying? Because, someone can be full of love and someone can be full of hate, and they can both say the same thing. But is it true or not? People can come to the same conclusions through different routes. So like there's certain things that men have realized about female nature, and some men have realized it by being undateable and no woman wants them. And then another man, all the women want them. But they both see the same thing, how there's a difference of how women treat men that they're attracted to versus men they're not attracted to. And so both of those men can go down different routes and see the same truth about women. And so then they'll say, like I've said certain things about women that are true, and women get mad about it and call me an incel. Meanwhile, me and Brittany I don't want to say too much I'll just say it. We have a really healthy sex life. I'm not an incel, but I'll get called an incel by pointing out certain things about female nature that's true. And I have black friends in my personal life. I'm friends with Pookie. I'm friends with Guala. Most of my friends are white, but I don't really have a lot of friends. Mostly I just I go to work, come home, hang out or whatever. But it doesn't change I get along really well with Guala. But the facts is still true that blacks are not a net taxpayer as a demographic. There are blacks who are net taxpayers. But for every black that is a net taxpayer, there's way more that are not. There's way more that are costing the government more than they're paying in taxes. And that's a fact. And stating that fact doesn't make me a hater. But there are blacks that want to avoid accountability. So they want to label me a racist and a hater, and they say, well, how dare you say these stats and this information, But hey, if you're 13% of the population, it doesn't make sense for you to be drawing 23% of the welfare, especially if you're not a net taxpayer. Now, some people will say, well, people are poor and at a disadvantage, and so that they need these programs. Well, if you look, poverty has only gone up since they've been implemented. Paying people to be poor just makes people stay poor. When you feed somebody for not working, you take away their incentive to get a job. They're not getting hungry. If you've got government housing and government food, where's the incentive to go get a job? Because you're going to make it, you're going to live. And now you can have 8 kids and get their food for free. What's the incentive? And so what we've done with the welfare state is we tried to help poor people, but accidentally made more poor people and made a whole entire class of leeches and parasites. Now, I understand those words are, you use the word parasite and people are going to say, well, that's racist, that you're dehumanizing language or whatever. But I don't know of a better word to use. That's a very accurate word. What does a parasite do? A parasite attaches itself to a host and it lives off of the host. The flea drinks the blood from the dog. He doesn't go out and hunt. The dog's doing all the work to get the food, and the flea's just drinking the blood out the dog. That's what a parasite doesn't benefit the host. And there is a parasitic class in America, and it's made up of all kind of races and all kind of gender, all kind of different, groups of people. But there is a large and growing section of the American people who exist as parasites, and it's unhealthy for the host, and it's not sustainable. The parasitic class is growing while the working class is shrinking. And eventually there's a tipping point. There's some people who are like me that are principled to where they're never going to be part of the parasite class. It's just so against our identity and our values and what we believe in. And so we will just never go that route. And then there's the people, I know a lot of people like this that are sort of on the edge there, to where eventually they say, well, hey, these people have more food on EBT in their refrigerator than I do working. I might as well do it too. If everybody else is doing it, I'm going to do it. If they're getting theirs, I'm going to get mine. And eventually, as more and more people move toward leeching off of the rest of the people, we'll get to a point to where there's too many parasites on the host for the host to survive it. And then if the host dies, the parasites, they don't know how to take care of themselves and they have no host anymore. And then everyone dies. It's not sustainable. And if we look in human history, we see that humans don't correct behavior in time ever. They wait until it hurts to make an adjustment. And by then, it's normally too late. And they can look at in the past in human history and they can see hundreds and hundreds of civilizations rise and fall. They can see why they rose. They can see why they fell. They can see all the patterns, and they still don't learn from history. They can do the math and they can logically understand, hey, this isn't sustainable, but they still don't correct the action in time. They wait until it hurts. And I don't know that there's any solution because, I mean, you can try to raise awareness, but, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Maybe if you put a little salt in their mouth, maybe they might. And you can try to use reason, but most people are not reasonable. Most people are not rational. Most people go off of emotions and they live their life to feel good. They're not really interested in truth. They're not really interested in the greater good. They're interested in feeling happy in the moment, feeling good now. And to fix a lot of problems, you have to be in a state of feeling uncomfortable. And to learn a lot of truths, you have to be able to be uncomfortable. And so a lot of people have a reaction to the truth almost like they're allergic to it. They're like, that's uncomfortable. And their gut reaction is to just call the person telling the truth the bad guy, to demonize the people telling the truth, to equate the truth making them not feel good to the person telling the truth as an attacker, an aggressor, the bad person. And I really don't have hatred for any of these people. I really honestly don't. But I know it's not good for them to be a dependent class. This is how you make slaves. This is how you control farm animals. The free food is how you enslave people, how you get them dependent. Now, I know if my chickens were to go out in the wild, it's not safe for them. You know, there's so many wild animals that would eat them. But they go back in the pen. Every night I can open the door, they can go out and they can eat, but they're going to go back in the pen. The pen gives them safety. There's free food in there. There's free water in there. They're used to being in there. The Romans, they used to domesticate wild hogs. They would go into a place where there were wild hogs and then just start feeding them in a spot and building a fence around them. And the government conditioning people. See, the more and more people get on EBT, the more grocery prices are going to rise artificially. It's just like when the government give free money out of Social Security to subsidize illegal immigrants' rents and them to get houses. You know, like right now, if a neighborhood is too white, there are government programs to give non-white people subsidies to pay part of their rent to move into a white neighborhood. Why are them programs there? What's that about? I'm not going to get into this video about what that's about. I'm just going to put the question in your mind and you can go look to see if what I'm saying is true, find out it is true, and go down that rabbit hole yourself. But the government is trying to get people used to needing them for clothes, needing them for food. And the more and more people, you know, it's like college. Why did college get so expensive? Partly because the government started paying for the college of people in the military and veterans. And whenever the government gets involved, whether in healthcare or college or housing or food, the prices go up because it's easy for people to spend money they feel is free. And they can afford to pay more than what the general public can afford to pay. And this causes the prices to rise. as more and more people get on EBT, it's going to artificially inflate the prices of food. And as that happens, the government is trying to get it to a certain point to where the only people that can afford to eat are the people on EBT. And then the government's going to come in and it's going to say, you're my bitch, you're my slave, you do whatever I say or you don't eat. They want to be able to say, oh, this is government housing. We make the rules for your house. We can come in without a warrant. We can kick you out. Dependence leads to slavery. And the government has no incentive to want you to be free. If you're free and you're independent, they can't make money off of you. If you go out there on your own land and you build your own house and you make your own food and you make your own clothes, the Rothschilds aren't getting a cut of any of that. If you trade it with each other, one another, and you're not using any credit cards or anything, the bank's not getting a cut of it. How the government wants to tax you. It's wanting you to be a tax farm. It's the government looks at regular humans the same way that I look at chickens or goats or cows, or they're farming us. We're a tax farm. They're not looking out for your best interest. They're a parasitic class themselves. Most preachers, most government people, and a lot of other people in America are the parasitic class. It's not just the poor that are part of the parasitic class. There's billionaires that are part of the parasitic class. There's government people. There's people that they don't work. They go into a church building and they talk and they want 10% of all your money. And then there's preachers that work a job, just like Paul and Acts in the Bible did. You know, in the Bible, they worked. They didn't just not work. So there's people who will use religion as a means to be lazy and not work and get other people's money that works. There's people who use government to not work and get other people's money that work. And then there's people that are just the regular people that just don't work. And they get the government, they team up together and get the government to go rob money out of people's paychecks and live off of their work instead of working themselves. And none of this is fair. None of this is okay. None of this is moral and none of this is good. And there's a lot of people that will come out and say, well, Paul, you're greedy. And every single one of these people that have done this, when I ask them, well, how much do you give to charity? None. It tends to be that the conservatives that are opposed to forced redistribution of wealth give more to charity than the liberals who don't. The liberals give nothing to charity. They only think of themselves and they imagine everyone else is like they are, and that you need the government to force people to take money from these people and give to these people. They're projecting. The liberals will say, when the conservatives are against abortion, they'll say, well, you should adopt. Well, conservatives adopt more than liberals do. It's projection. They're not going to do it, and they only care about their self, and so they think that's how other people are. And if you really break it down, the left really is the party of being allergic to responsibility and duty. Most of them don't believe in duty or responsibility. They believe in pleasure. They believe in freedom. Freedom to do what? To be degenerates, to live off other people, to kill their own babies. They're always wanting to avoid responsibility and accountability. Now, it's hard to really prove that we have any duties or responsibilities or any obligations to God or the universe or each other or anything. Like, I can't really prove it, but I think it's a better way to live. I think it's a happier way to live, to try to contribute to help other people. But there's things that don't help other people. There's a homeless man named DJ in McRae, and 3 people have took him into their homes because he's homeless, and he's robbed every one of them. He's on the needle. He's addicted to heroin or meth, and I think both. And he just robs everybody. And so if you backtrack, there were a lot of people trying to help him by giving him free meals, giving him free clothes, giving him free stuff, but it wasn't really helping him. Sometimes help is help, and sometimes help is enabling people to be the worst versions of themselves. And that's really what the welfare state does. It enables people to be the worst versions of themselves. It allows people to not have to really develop and grow up. And so people, the safety nets do not really bring real safety. They stop people from developing and growing up. Gingers smell like pennies. I'm trying to think, have I ever been close enough to I don't know that that's true, really, because I have a redheaded brother and we've got into fights and wrestled, and I can't remember him smelling like a penny. But, but yeah. So it's it's another way to avoid accountability, the whole name calling. Oh, you said a fact I don't like that shows the truth and I feel uncomfortable about it. I'm going to call you a name. People do it all the time. They can't call you a liar. If they go look up the data, they figure out that you're telling the truth. So then they try to say that there's some conspiracy to skew the data, Meanwhile, the death certificates are real. The victims are real. The grave sites are real. The murder rate is what the murder rate is. The court cases, it can be all documented. But it doesn't matter how much proof you have. You can have all the proof in the world. But if someone doesn't want to believe it, they can see all the proof in the world and they still won't believe it. People have an amazing ability to self-deceive themselves, to just choose to be delusional. And so some people, they don't want to realize the truth of what I'm saying, and they don't want to take accountability for it. And it's just easier for them to just say, well, you must be motivated by hatred. You must have some hatred. And then when I get angry, they want to use my anger as evidence for my hatred. But there's more than one reason to be angry. There is unjustified anger and there's justifiable anger. Sometimes just because someone's angry, it doesn't mean they're bad. Like if someone come up and just punched my little sister for no reason, I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be extremely angry. I'm even going to get violent, but I'm not a bad person and I'm not in the wrong. I'm just being protective of my little sister. And I'd probably go a lot further than that, honestly, but I got to watch what I say on YouTube. But just because someone's angry doesn't mean they're in the wrong. You can do things in your anger that are wrong. Anger and happiness both cloud judgment. So if, you got to be careful what you say when you get angry, or you might say something you don't really mean or take it a little too far. And if you're overly happy, you'll tend to make promises you might not can keep or give away more than you should. Whenever it's best to make decisions when you're calm. Not when you're too angry, not when you're too happy, not when you're too sad, not when you're too excited. When you're calm is the time to make decisions. But people tend to think, happy is good, angry is bad. That's not really the case. There's a proper context for emotions, and sometimes it's right to be angry. Sometimes it's good to be angry. Sometimes it's very toxic not to be angry. Like if you knew your people were just destroying your people, and if people were just stealing all your stuff and killing your family members and everything, and you weren't angry about it, something's wrong with you. If your grandparents die and you're not sad, something's wrong with you. There's a time and place for every emotion. But you should control your emotions. You should not let your emotions control you. But emotions are necessary to motivate. And pain is a necessary teacher. There's a lot of things that you can only learn through pain. And there's a lot of things that you don't have to learn through pain, but you'll learn them faster through pain. There's things that could take 100 years to learn without pain that you could learn in 2 seconds with pain. And I'm not saying that like pain is, I'm not saying go hurt yourself. I'm not saying that. But, like But it's good to get used to being uncomfortable. And one thing, I used to have a lot of debates with my former enemy become my friend, Kyle Massey. We're really good friends now. But when we first met each other, we met through arguing. And he was wrong about a lot of things that he found out through arguing with me. And I was wrong about a lot of things that I found out through arguing with him. But what we didn't do is we didn't try to gaslight the other person or straw man the other person's argument or say, well, so by you saying that, you're really saying that. We didn't do all that. We actually listened to each other, and it broadened both of our perspectives, because I would argue with him, and sometimes I would get angry and I'd be like, well, why am I so angry about this? And I would realize that I was insecure in my position because I really didn't know what I was talking about. There were things there were other sides of the issue that I hadn't thought about before. And so there is a healthy way to argue, and there's an unhealthy way. The unhealthy way to argue is where you're just trying to win and score points, and you're just insulting the other person, and you're being dishonest about what their argument is. That's an unhealthy, unproductive argument. There's no sense in doing that. The healthy way to argue is to actually listen to the other person and try to actually understand their perspective and what they're saying, and also make your point. And you don't need to be closed off to criticism or not letting people argue against your beliefs. It's good for you, because one, if you're in the right, you'll learn how to better defend your position. And then if you're in the wrong, you'll be open to realizing that you're wrong, and then you can correct your position and be right. So, and there's some people that are just, they never learn, they never develop, they never go anywhere because they're allergic to criticism, and they're not willing to. There's some people who their self-esteem hinges upon them being perfect, which is unachievable, but there's some people that they feel like nothing, like if they're wrong about the smallest little thing, they feel like they're shit, they're worthless. And if they're right, they feel like they're on top of the world, and they're unable to admit that they can be wrong because their identity is attached to this unrealistic expectation for themselves. I've met a few people like this, and it's like they cannot be held accountable for anything. They can't admit to being wrong about anything. And so they're never able to be corrected, and they stay a 16-year-old their entire life. There really are. There's people that are gray-headed, and now, generally speaking, the elderly tend to be wiser than the general population. They've learned a few things over the years. But there is a special type of fool that lives all those years and stays a fool. They're unable to ever admit that they could ever possibly be wrong, and they won't take any criticism whatsoever. And I'm not, there's some people that are just critical for the sake of being critical. They're basically like a bully. They just want to nitpick, and they just want to tear people down. And then there's constructive criticism. My hope is not that anybody is in a worse position. I want people to be elevated and do better. And so my heart is actually in improving the conditions of everyone. But some people don't see it that way. But you got to call a spade a spade. You can't. So I see people being sort of herded into slavery, and I don't want them to be slaves. And those people don't understand that the free lunch is slavery. That is what it's there for. It's not, the government is not doing these government handouts out of the goodness of their heart. They're trying to restructure the economy in such a way to make everybody serfs again. And this always happens in human history. A government comes to power because the one before wasn't given justice and was oppressing people. So a new government comes in place to give justice, to right wrongs. And this government depends on the support of the people. But over time, it gets more powerful, and it wants to reproduce itself. You know, the government, the institution wants to keep on living. And eventually it gets to a point to where it doesn't have to make as many concessions to the people, and it becomes the very thing it replaced. It becomes the slaver. It becomes the corrupt thing that doesn't give justice. And it eventually outlives its usefulness, and it's time for it to be over. And our government started off to try to safeguard liberty and give more freedom to people. But as time goes on, it's becoming the opposite. It's becoming a slaver. And you could look at Rome, the same thing happened in Rome. The first Roman kings were there to give the Roman people a freedom from foreigners, to throw off the yoke of the Etruscans, to provide safety from the Samnites and the Gallic people and all these other Greeks and all these other people, right? And then the kings become tyrannical. They overthrew the kings and they got the republic. And the republic give freedom, but eventually the republic become corrupt. It become an oligarchy. Well, it always was, but it become more so consolidating power and money in the hands of the nobles and exploiting the regular people. And it changed to an empire because it was corrupt and couldn't function. And that empire, it went from giving people freedom to dictating the price for every single item. Your job was decided by the government. You know, Rome was all about libertas, freedom, you know, but then they controlled the prices of everything. The emperors, they wanted luxury wine. They didn't like that everybody had grapes growing everywhere, so they ripped them all up, which would come to hurt them later on. Like, they could have avoided the whole Antonine Plague if they'd have let people have the antioxidants. All right, I gotta go. I'm getting like 2 or 3 different phone calls and everything. But you see that happen in the Roman Empire. They went from giving people freedom and growing in wealth to the government trying to micromanage every single aspect of the economy, to the point to where the Romans were so fed up of it, they would rather live under the Germanic kings. They had more freedom and more justice under them. But I hope y'all have a good day. I got a few calls to return and see what's going on.